All right, guys, I have two things to talk about today. One of them is, yes, there is still Christmas things sitting behind me. It's fine. This does not mean this was recorded in December. It is indeed February. So happy President's Day, and you might be expecting me to go wild for presidents because that is basically what I have been doing for the last 2 years. However, I am kind of at a point where I don't have enough books done in a quorum to talk to you about. So instead, we're going to get political today and talk about political podcasts. And the second thing that I'm going to be talking about at the end of this is to admit something very, very, very sad about how much podcast I've been listening to lately. So one of the reasons that I don't have anything to really review for you guys today outside of these podcasts is because I have become obsessed with one political podcast in particular. And I'm going to talk about that one at the end. But I'm going to give you guys 4 recommendations today for political/historical podcasts that I have found while trolling my Spotify, which is where I listen to most of my music and my podcasts. And I have really enjoyed them. So the first one, which I have listened to in its totality, which is a lot of episodes, is American Elections Wicked Game. This is a podcast put on by Wondery and narrated by Lindsey Graham. Not the Lindsey Graham from the Senate. This man has an unfortunate name for the time right now. But American Elections Wicked Game has a really silly title, which I say to everyone when I recommend it. But what they do is they go over every single American presidential election in our history. So it doesn't matter whether it's a contentious election, it doesn't matter if it's somebody's re-election, every single one for about 45 minutes to an hour. And what you find out going through this podcast is that even the elections that you might think are, boring, are not. There is always something going down. And I learned so many little details that I did not learn going through my biographies, because say there's a biography of a president and they are up for re-election and they win, unless something very drastic happens, the biography doesn't really spend a lot of time on it because there are other things to get to about their presidency. That is not what this one is focused on. And it just drills down into details that I totally missed, things that are interesting, and really shows you how the process of our American presidential elections has changed. This podcast started about a year before the 2016 election, with the idea being that they released an episode every week up until the 2020 election. Whew. If this is something that you're interested in, I highly recommend it. It was so good, so detailed, and very engaging. This political podcast is one that I have not yet listened to all the episodes of yet, but it's called Political Scandals, put on by Parcast. Political Scandals does not have as much of a trajectory as, say, American Elections Wicked Game, but it goes over the biggest political scandals in American history. Some of these related to presidents, some of them not. Senators, Congress people, they're all up for grabs. And that's what makes it really interesting. There are people or events that I've never heard of. Maybe they make a blip in a biography that I've read, or maybe they don't show up at all, but they show up in this podcast. And I have kind of clicked around a little bit. Some of them, if I'm not interested in, I won't listen to it. And obviously, if I've just recently read a biography and that president has showed up, then I listen to that one to see what is all going on there. But if you are interested in learning about scandals that you may never have heard of before, Political Scandal is the way to go. I also want to talk really briefly about a very short podcast. Short in this case being 8 episodes, put on by Rachel Maddow and MSNBC. It is historical. It's called Bagman, and it is the story of Spiro Agnew. You might be asking yourself, who is Spiro Agnew? Unless you're me and you have read a scary number of books on Nixon. Spiro Agnew was Richard Nixon's first vice president. Before / at the beginning of all of the Watergate nonsense, Spiro Agnew was indicted for bribery, and there was this huge investigation into him, and he was eventually forced to resign. And this is when Richard Nixon appoints Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford then becomes president when Richard Nixon resigns. So had this not happened to Spiro Agnew, we could have had a President Spiro Agnew. And the more I learn about this man, the more I'm like, yeesh. So Richard Nixon once called Spiro Agnew his impeachment protection, because no one would impeach Richard Nixon and put Spiro Agnew in that seat, because that was how yikes he was. So again, it's only 8 episodes, and it drills down into something that would have been a huge scandal, but was, kind of forgotten in the huger scandal that was Watergate. It's incredibly well put on, it's very well done, and again, it's a piece of that history that is always mentioned when you read books about Richard Nixon and Watergate, but kind of just have to blip on past as we get to everything else that happens at that point. So the final podcast that I'm going to talk to you about is kind of embarrassing. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I feel like just the amount of political news, it's just gone up astronomically in the last 5 years or so. And there's been so many things happening with the Trump presidency, things around the world, and then just add on top of the coronavirus and add to Russia, Syria stuff. And it's been really hard to keep track of. So I started listening a couple of months ago on the recommendation of a friend to the NPR Politics podcast. This is, as it sounds, put on by NPR, and I have absolutely fallen in love with their political coverage. How in love? Do you want to know? This is where it gets embarrassing. So not only am I listening to their episodes, which they do a weekly roundup once a week, and then they do smaller episodes when there's big news, and kind of feels like of late there's just like big news every day. Kind of feels that way for the last 4 years, actually. This podcast started in the run-up to the 2016 election, and I did a thing, which is that in my desire to understand 2015/2016 forward on a bit level, I'm not only listening to their current episodes, but I've gone backward, started back in 2015, and I'm listening to their entire backlog of episodes. I believe, somewhere in April 2017, and it is just hitting me with a weird amount of nostalgia and educating me on things that, Russia. I know there's a scandal with Russia, and I could tell you the basics, but do I remember the details? Do I know the investigation? No. I'm not sure how much in 2016, 2017 I was paying attention. This brings it forward basically on a day-by-day basis with excellent coverage and analysis, and also has just been showing me really, really striking parallels between the 2016 election cycle and the 2020 election cycle. I really feel like going on this journey, it's a little bit painful, but at the same time, it's just really helping to educate me or re-educate me or give me more details on just day by day what has been happening since 2015, 2016. So reliving the 2016 election through this was insane. Currently still in the first 100 days of the Trump presidency, and it's wild knowing what's going to happen. So if you would like to self-torture, you can join me and become very, very addicted to the NPR Politics podcast. Again, it's great, it's wonderful. Their episodes are not usually longer than 40 minutes, and the people who come on are great. So if you listen to any of these, if you just need political news now, highly recommend this one. And I'm just gonna keep listening to the backlog as we move forward. So those are my 4 recommendations for political podcasts that you can check out, both historical and current. And that is some embarrassing information on why I haven't read anything recently, because I have earbuds in and the NPR Politics podcast going. So hope you're finding some new obsession to give you some kind of joy. I don't know. I'm a little bit crazy, but I'm having fun and I'm learning, and really that's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day. So thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye.